Ever get that feeling? Like you're talking to someone, they seem great on the surface, charming even, maybe a little intimidating even, but then something feels off. Then they say something so clueless, so lacking in self-awareness, that you find yourself wondering if you imagined the whole interaction. Well, you might have been dealing with a narcissist, and well, on that note, today we're diving deep into Disarming the Narcissist by Wendy Behary. This book is really like an x-ray for those relationships where you constantly feel like you're walking on eggshells. We're going to give you the tools to not just survive these relationships, but to potentially thrive. So how do we even know if we're dealing with a narcissist?
Well, it's more than just someone being selfish or needing a little extra attention. Think of the classic archetype, maybe a modern-day Sir Lancelot. On the surface, all charm and success, right? But underneath, a deep inability to really truly acknowledge the needs and feelings of others. It's important to remember that everyone can have narcissistic traits. It's when those traits are so dominant that they're sort of like causing consistent problems. That's when we start looking at narcissism.
Right. It's like they're stuck in this loop of needing validation, but being completely unequipped to get it authentically. So they create this persona, this mask to protect themselves. It's almost tragic in a way. But, what I find fascinating is why does someone become so self-centered in the first place?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Well, there are a few different theories out there. Some psychologists point to the spoiled child theory. Think Veruca Salt from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, demanding everything and throwing tantrums when they don't get their way. Then there's the dependent child theory. This is where someone, maybe their parents were overly involved in their lives, so they never really developed that sense of independence or self-sufficiency. And perhaps the most common theory is the lonely, deprived child. This suggests that inconsistent or conditional love, often coupled with criticism, can lead to some really deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. And then there's this constant need for validation.
That makes a lot of sense. If you grow up feeling like you're not enough, you might spend your whole life trying to prove otherwise. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. It's not just about them, is it? It's about the dynamic between their stuff and our own.
Exactly. That's a really important point. And that's where schemas come into play. Think of schemas as these deeply held beliefs about ourselves and the world that we form early in life based on our experiences. They're like invisible scripts that play out in our relationships, often unconsciously. Behary suggests that everyone has schemas. For example, someone who grew up with a caregiver who was constantly critical might develop a schema of defectiveness, always feeling like they're not good enough.
Okay, so let's say you've got that defectiveness schema and you get into a relationship with someone who has a strong entitlement schema, always needing to be right, the center of attention. Talk about a recipe for disaster. How do we even begin to untangle that web?
You're absolutely right. It can feel like a recipe for disaster. Awareness is key. Once you understand your own schemas and how they might be playing out in your relationship with the narcissist, you can start to make more conscious choices.
So it's not about blaming our past, it's about understanding how it might be influencing our present. That's powerful stuff. But let's get real for a second. How do we actually spot these narcissistic patterns? They can be so charming, manipulative. How do we see through the smoke and mirrors? Welcome back. So we're unpacking some pretty intense relationship dynamics here. But before you swear off dating apps forever, I promise there's hope. What I find so powerful about disarming the narcissist is it's not just about surviving these relationships. It's about understanding them so deeply that you can actually thrive. And that starts with recognizing the different masks that narcissists often wear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These masks, they're really defense mechanisms. Imagine a scared child hiding behind a tough guy facade, trying to protect themselves from getting hurt. One common mask is the bully, using intimidation and aggression to maintain a sense of control. Think of that boss who throws their weight around, belittles their employees. Then there's the show-off, the person who constantly needs to be the center of attention, bragging about their accomplishments, downplaying the achievements of others. We also have the addict who might use substances, work, or even risky behavior to numb their pain and avoid facing their inner world. And lastly, there's the entitled one, who feels deserving of special treatment. They operate under a different set of rules, and they throw a fit when they don't get their way.
Oh, I know that one. It's like they're putting on a performance, right? And sometimes we get so caught up in the show that we miss the vulnerability underneath it all. So, okay, let's say we've identified the mask. We're recognizing our own schemas. Now what? How do we actually create healthier dynamics in these relationships?
That's the big question. Well, for me, it starts with shifting our perspective a little bit. Think about it. If you knew someone had a physical injury, You wouldn't expect them to perform at the same level as someone who is physically healthy.
Right.
So similarly, approach them with a similar understanding of their emotional injury. It's not about condoning their behavior. It's about having compassion for the wounded child within.
Okay, I can get on board with that.
So,
But how do we cultivate compassion without becoming a doormat?
right, that's the balancing act, isn't it? It's a dance. Behary makes a really important distinction between empathy and endorsement. Empathy is about understanding where someone is coming from, recognizing their pain, even if you don't agree with their behavior. Endorsement, on the other hand, is about condoning those actions, giving them a free pass.
Okay, so empathy is not endorsement. I like that. It's about getting into their headspace, not giving them a free pass. But how does empathy actually help me in this situation?
That's a great question, because when we understand the narcissist's inner world, we're less likely to take their behavior so personally. We can see it for what it often is, a reflection of their own struggles, not a direct attack on our worth.
That's huge.
And that understanding gives us the space to choose our responses more thoughtfully, more strategically.
So less reacting, more responding, but in a way that still protects our own well-being.
Okay, so now we're in a calmer, more strategic headspace. What are some practical strategies that we can use?
Well, one of the most important things is setting boundaries. It's about identifying what you will and will not tolerate, and then communicating that clearly and consistently.
This sounds great in theory, but how do you actually set boundaries with someone who might not be so receptive to the idea? It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall.
Yeah.
It can definitely feel that way, but it's not impossible. Start by recognizing your own triggers, those things that push your buttons and make you react emotionally. So for example, let's say being constantly criticized about your work really triggers your defectiveness schema. You can set a boundary by saying something like, I'm not open to feedback delivered that way. If you have something you'd like to discuss about my work, I'm happy to talk, but it needs to be respectful.
Okay, so it's different than just getting defensive or shutting down, but what happens if they just bulldoze right over that boundary?
Well, in that case, you have to be prepared to follow through with consequences. That might mean disengaging from the conversation, taking a time out, or even removing yourself from the situation entirely. Consistency is key here. If you cave every time they push back, they'll learn that your boundaries are meaningless.
It's true, they pick up on that really quickly. But what if their response is something like, well, this is just how I am, take it or leave it?
You're right, that's a tough one. Then you have a choice to make. Are you willing to continue to tolerate this behavior knowing that it might not change? Or are you ready to prioritize your own well-being, even if it means walking away?
Wow, big questions. And honestly, I think that's a good place for us to pause and really reflect, because sometimes recognizing when a situation is no longer serving us is the most powerful move we can make. We'll be back in a bit to talk more about what real change looks like, both for ourselves and for the narcissist in our lives. Welcome back, everyone. We've been talking about narcissism, those relationships that can feel like you're walking through a minefield. But remember, knowledge is power. And in this final part of our deep dive into disarming the narcissists, we're focusing on change. Can a narcissist really change? And if so, what can we do to help make that happen?
Let's be real, you can't force anyone to change, narcissist or not.
Yeah.
It's like trying to teach a goldfish to play the drums,
Yeah.
you know. But you can create an environment that's more supportive of change.
Okay, I like that analogy. So how do we go about creating this goldfish-friendly environment?
Well, Behary, she talks about leverage and incentive as being key. Leverage means there needs to be a compelling reason for the narcissist to change. Maybe they're facing a consequence, like a strained relationship or problems at work, something that makes them realize their current behavior just isn't working anymore.
So they hit a wall and think, okay, something has to change.
Exactly. And that's where the incentive comes in. We need to paint a picture of a better future for them, one where their needs can be met, but in a healthy way. Maybe that looks like experiencing genuine connection and intimacy, but it requires them to show up differently.
So it's not just about pointing out what they're doing wrong. It's about offering a better alternative.
That's it. And this is where your own personal growth and boundaries become super important. When you step back and refuse to engage in those unhealthy patterns, it creates a powerful incentive for them to either step up or potentially lose the relationship.
That makes a lot of sense. But realistically, even with all the best intentions and strategies in place, change is a process, right? It's not an overnight thing.
Oh, absolutely. Behary emphasizes that transformation in a narcissist is a journey, not a destination. There will be bumps in the road, moments when those old patterns resurface. But with consistent effort and skillful communication, real lasting change is definitely possible.
That's reassuring to hear. Because let's face it, sometimes it can feel like you're stuck in this endless cycle of dysfunction. But if I'm hearing you right, even if the narcissist in our lives doesn't make a complete transformation, there's still hope for us, right?
Absolutely. By really taking these tools and strategies from disarming the narcissist to heart, by understanding our own triggers and setting healthy boundaries, we can experience more peace and fulfillment in these relationships, regardless of whether or not the narcissist changes.
That is so important to remember. It's about taking back our power. But let's be real for a moment. There are times when a narcissist's behavior might cross a line. So what are some warning signs that tell us it might be time to step back for our own well-being?
Behary is very clear about this. If you are experiencing any form of abuse, physical, verbal, emotional, it is crucial to prioritize your safety and seek support. Other red flags to watch out for include escalating addictions, a lack of accountability, and a pattern of manipulation.
So it's not just about someone having a bad day or messing up once. It's about a consistent pattern of harmful behavior, right?
Right.
And in those situations, sometimes the best thing we can do is walk away.
Exactly. And thankfully, Disarming the Narcissist offers guidance on how to do that safely and compassionately, both of yourself and the other person.
You know, it's been quite a journey unpacking all of this. We started by talking about how it feels to be in a relationship with a narcissist, that confusion and uncertainty. But by understanding their patterns, and just as importantly, our own, we can navigate these relationships with so much more clarity and confidence.
I completely agree. It's not about excusing bad behavior, but empowering ourselves to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships. And that's something we can all strive for.
Absolutely. And on that note, as we wrap up our deep dive into disarming the narcissist, we encourage you to reflect on what resonated most with you today. What's one small step you can take to cultivate a healthier dynamic in your own life? Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Thanks for joining us.